Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Help Is Here podcast. When we change the way we think, we change the way we feel, we change the way we act. And in this episode, I'm going to be sharing something which may well lead to a very crucial paradigm shift for you, which is going to enable you to get closer towards the freedom that you really wish for. So when I was in a porn addiction, I was honestly on a mission to do whatever I could to overcome it. I was aware that this was the biggest issue in my life, and I needed to prioritize finding a path towards freedom. So I didn't have much money back then, but I really wanted to get some support from somebody else. And I went online and I came across somebody called Craig Perra, who's the founder of the Mindful Habit. And his program was like crazy expensive. I think one-on-one, he was working with clients for like $10,000, and he had a group coaching program, and that cost thousands as well. So I couldn't afford it, just to be straight. I really couldn't back then at all. But I could see that his social media wasn't doing very well. He had like these graphics that weren't presented particularly effectively, and he wasn't posting much. And I was like, there's an opportunity here, because at that time, I had actually been creating a lot of graphics on social media about football and football data because I'd run a different business. So I was like, you know what, I could probably use my skills here in terms of like creating graphics and content creation to maybe help him improve his social media whilst learning about his method, and then I can overcome porn addiction. So I sent him a message on Facebook. I actually found him in like a Facebook group. I think that's how I came across him in the first place, to be honest. But I found him in like some Facebook group that I was in for like maybe entrepreneurs or something. And I sent him a message and I just say to him, look, I'm in a porn addiction. I really want to overcome this. Can I work for you for free? Because I want to overcome this problem and your social media is terrible. And he arranged a chat with me. So we jumped on a call and he was actually quite open to this. So we ended up making a really good deal where I think he ended up actually paying me a bit of money as well. And I'd create this social media like quite often, you know, probably posting once or twice a day or maybe a bit less. But anyway, it doesn't really matter. I was just posting on his social media quite a lot. And, you know, I was learning more and more stuff. And there was something which really stood out to me, which he said back then. He said that when he was in a porn addiction, because he was also in a porn and sex addiction, you know, he was going and seeing prostitutes, he was taking drugs, he was cheating on his wife, and his life was a complete mess, even though he had like this big 6-figure job and he was really successful externally. But his life was a bit of a mess internally. So he found that, you know, going to therapy and just like talking through past problems wasn't really changing anything. And what he needed to do was focus on actually doing something instead of not doing something. And I remember him saying very specifically that he was very, very good at doing things. For example, he did have a very successful job. He did have a really good wife and family and all of this stuff. So like relationships locked in, sort of business and money locked in, doing good in life in general. So very good at doing things, but he was absolutely terrible at trying not to do things. And that really hit hard for me, because at that time in my life, I had a journal and I was writing down 6 goals every day. And so many of those goals were things like, do not go on Instagram, do not watch porn, do not masturbate, do not go on Twitter, just things like that. It was always focused on like not doing things. And when I looked back at the data from like 6 months of journaling about not doing things, I actually found when I wrote down the goal of not doing something, I was more likely to do that thing. So I started to shift my own approach and I started to focus on more on what I did want instead of what I didn't want. So, you know, I'd get into working out and self-improvement, reading books and doing a lot of things that were very, very good for me. And I definitely went on these longer no-fap streaks. There's no doubt about that. So I'm sure his program that I was in, because I was in his like group coaching program worth thousands of dollars, I'm sure that did help me to some extent in other areas of my life. The problem is, when you are in an addiction, when you have this compulsive desire, it is insatiable. And it's going to continue until you deal with that desire directly. Now, I came up with a bit of a quote for myself, which was like, focus on what you do want instead of what you don't want. But the reality is, when you're in an addiction, you are going to want the porn. Like, you are going to want the thing that you've developed a psychological, emotional dependency on. And so I wasn't really facing the reality of addiction. I was just trying to avoid, distract, substitute. And that's why I stayed in the addiction for years later, and I kept on relapsing, even though the no-fap streaks got longer and longer. So what we teach our clients is really less about like focusing on what you do want or don't want, because you're going to want porn. And so why would we focus on, like that too much? I mean, we do focus on the wanting. We need the wanting to actually deal with the desire correctly. But more than anything, what we focus on is, okay, well, how do we actually deal with that wanting? That's the crucial part, is you are going to want the porn. So how do we deal with the wanting of the porn? And so when you're in an addiction, your mind's basically going to say like things like, maybe I don't want porn, can't watch porn, things like that. But that's just not true, because the truth is you can watch porn and you do want to watch porn. So we need to start facing the reality, which is you do want porn and you are going to want porn. But the problem is making a choice, and that inability to make a rational choice when you have that wanting. So this video is titled, "It is impossible not to watch porn." So let's just delve into that a little bit further. I read a book a few years back. It was bought by my mum. I think it was like a Christmas present. And I remember going on holiday, and I think, where was it? I think it was in Egypt. And I was reading this book, and it was about acceptance commitment therapy. And I really didn't like the book because it kind of conflicted with some of my stoic sort of mindset of, focus on what you can control, not on what you can't control. But there was something in that book which was also very, very influential. And it was this idea of not having any dead goals. And again, this is just going back to this idea that it is impossible not to watch porn. Because the truth is, if you're trying not to watch porn, you're trying to do something which every single person in a grave right now is achieving. You can focus, or you can achieve the goal of not watching porn once you're dead. Like, let's focus instead on what you can do while you're alive. So that's not to say let's go and substitute and distract and avoid porn and get into self-improvement necessarily and read loads of books. This is more about what are you choosing to do and why. Now, you're going to have urges. You're going to have that wanting. The desire is insatiable. The desire is compulsive due to the change in the addictive neural pathways. So we've got to accept that's where we're at right now. And then we've got to make a choice. So what am I choosing to do and why? Because it's impossible not to watch porn because you're focused on not doing something which all these dead people are actually doing because it doesn't even exist. It's like an illusion in your brain, which the addictive part of the mind's created. So instead, what are you doing? Now, with our clients, what we're doing is we're changing those neural pathways. And you can do that very, very proactively and actually attack this addiction. You don't need to wait for urges and be all defensive and helpless and feel like you've got to avoid all your triggers all the time. Because the only way to get out of an addiction is by going through the urges and changing those neural pathways, changing the brain maps. That's how you rewire the brain correctly and overcome this problem for good. I really hope this podcast is useful to you. If you would like to learn more, then we are running workshops very regularly now. So there's going to be a wait list in the description. Our one tonight has sold out already. So get on the wait list and I'll send you over an email when our next workshop will be. Thanks again, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.